For the love of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And for the love of Lady Zainab al-Kubra and Lady Kulthum, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And for the love of the awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, Sallu ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ظهر الفساد في البر والبحر بما كسبت أيدي الناس ليذيقهم بعد الذي عملوا لعلهم يرجعون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. عظم الله أجورنا وأجوركم بمصابنا أبي عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. What does the Quran tell us that needs to be protected from our environment? How does the Quran introduce the various different parts of our environment and our ecology that needs to be protected? And how do our Maraja al-Kiram and our fuqaha do the ijtihadat that allows them to be able to bring about fatawa for us to be able to follow in the scheme of environmental law, what we introduced yesterday as fiqh al-bi'ah. Imagine a religion comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are living in this planet. And imagine the religion did not provide you for clear guidance on how to keep your planet pristine, how to rejuvenate the planet, or that it would not tell you that if you were to harm this part of the planet or destroy this part of the environment, the earth would not be able to be a sustainable, hospitable place for you any longer. Surely, a religion that does not provide for something as basic as protecting the world that you live in would not be a proper religion for a person to be able to follow. Imagine you bought your house and there's no windows, no doors, no locks, no alarm system. Everything in your house is available to be destroyed and taken from you. And you have no method of protecting yourself. You would immediately say, I'm not buying this house. Or you would say that these people who are selling it to me, they're actually doing me a disservice. You need to know how to protect yourself such that if you leave your door unlocked, it is such a fundamental problem for your safety that you would ensure that you keep the door locked. Otherwise, you know that every time you step out of your house, you run the risk of coming back to everything having been taken from you. In the same way, when it comes to environmental protections, the Quran has spoken about a number of systems that need to be protected such that these become the primary ways to protect our environment from either temporary or permanent damage. Once we know what these are, these become what is known as the maqasid of the bi'ah, the ultimate objectives of the environment that need to be protected to ensure the longevity of the environment, to ensure that the environment continues to remain as pristine as possible. From these, our mujtahiddeen, may Allah preserve them, are able to perform the istinbat, to be able to derive the laws that reach you and I on how we are able to manage the environment. Yesterday in our discussion, we introduced the question of what has the Muslim and specifically Shi'i community done in this area. And we highlighted that there are three things that need to be constantly brought to our attention. There is the eco-theology, our aqa'id, the way in which we live, the way in which we have a world view of our relationship to the rest of creation. Then there is environmental ethics. And then there is environmental laws. And we highlighted that from the Shi'i and Sunni perspective, there has been a great amount of work being done, especially from the 1970s. But still, and until today, we do not have a marja in the world that has produced an usul al-fiqh or a set of ahkam or bab for fiqh al-bi'ah that is complete in producing laws for you and I. Whereas from our Sunni brethren, they have this. They have provided usul, they have provided maqasid, they have provided abwab in fiqh that allows the Sunni community to know how to navigate certain ahkam. For us to be able to think about this series, we also need to know what goes into the ijtihadi process for these laws to be derived, so that we can start to think about these things for ourselves. But we can engage with our maraji'. I remember once, may Allah bless this wonderful lady, very pure-hearted. We had the opportunity of meeting His Eminence, Grand Ayatollah, Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani. May Allah preserve him, keep him for us. It was the gathering, you go to meet the Sayyid, you can ask questions. May Allah bless her, this lovely auntie. She said to Sayyid al-Sistani, or we all had like one question, or there was for the whole group one question that could be asked. His Eminence is very busy, and we want to be able to hear him and then maybe engage with some dialogue, tell him about our issues in the West, ask him for his guidance for the challenges of our time. May Allah bless her, this lovely lady. She said, Sayyidina, the toilets in the haram are often very dirty. Can you fix this problem for us? Now I agree, it is a very important issue. Tahara, nidafa is a very important issue in Islam. So I do not belittle the question in any way. His Eminence, of course, with all of his patience and hilm and haiba, he said he will try to look into it and make sure that the toilets are cleaned in the future in the lady side of the haram in Najaf or in Karbala. Wonderful. However, I also imagine that when you have one opportunity to speak to the marja al-a'la of your time, and especially as a group, and one person gets to ask a question, for a 2-minute back and forth dialogue, there are very pressing matters that need to be presented. And an opportunity to engage in dialogue and explain from the perspective of the West, the shabab of the West, the seniors of the West, what is occurring in the community. So that the more we're able to press those messages, the more Sayyid hears about these issues and can put more focus and attention into some of these issues. When the greatest crisis facing the human community is the potential collapse of our ecology and environment, it requires us to have the context of how we can raise these questions with the leadership of our time, with the scholars of our time. And so as much as yesterday we started to introduce ecological questions around theology, we also need to think about how the ijtihad is done, and then to think about what we can develop off the back of some of these pressing issues, the way in which the Quran and Ahadith have introduced this subject matter to us. So yesterday, we concluded our discussion, and we said that there are principally three ways we can interact with the universe. We said that there is a very egocentric way. So it's all about me, and as much as I can extrapolate from the earth for my personal benefit, it doesn't matter who it destroys, it doesn't matter who it harms, it doesn't matter what the outcomes are. This is no different to a capitalistic vision of the world. That everything and everybody is only there for the purpose of making wealth and the rich richer. It doesn't matter if we ground you into we put you into the ground out of it. As long as we make money. It doesn't matter if we deplete all of our resources. It doesn't matter if we pollute all the oceans. Hey, our investors made money, right? Hey, we managed to actually, we got a nice return on our investment. This is the idea behind capitalism. And then there is the homocentric, the idea that everything is for the purpose of the human being. So as long as the human being and the collective human being are benefiting, it doesn't matter about anything else. So we can destroy the planet, we can destroy other species. Even if we lose a few species here and there, okay. But as long as the human being continues his progression and we get more access to new technologies, we get more access to be able to buy whatever we want from Amazon so that it reaches us the next day, or even then I can't wait till tomorrow, it has to come to today. This is the homocentric vision of the world. And then there is the ecocentric vision of the world that says that everything in creation has as much right as I do to exist. I don't get to plunder the planet. I don't get to destroy other species for my benefit. I have to progress and live in a bountiful world to the same extent that every other creature has the right to be able to exist within a bountiful world. So we asked you as your homework yesterday to review the Quran and to look for a set of verses in which a prophet of God interacts with a creature of Allah's that could either be destroyed in that moment, or the rest of people could destroy that creature or species in a moment, and what the dialogue and outcome of that Quranic story was. Who has some suggestions as to what story might be mentioned in the Quran? Prophet Sulaiman, salamullahi alayhi. Everyone open your Qurans, your phones, your apps, and let us have a look at this sort of ecocentric human existence that needs to be at the forefront of way in which we live. So what chapter is the story of Sulaiman alayhi salam? Chapter number? Okay, which surah? Surat An-Naml. So chapter number 27. Verse number 17. Now we know Sulaiman alayhi salam was able to understand the language of all creation, correct? Which means that when he was able to come across any creature, he could put them into his army, and he could dialogue with them. He could understand the birds, he could understand the bees, he could understand the fish, he could understand the jinnat, he could understand the languages of the human beings. Solomon in the Bible and Quran has this power gifted to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there are two individuals in the Quran that have had armies like no other. Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam's army in this sense, because it was over the jinn, the ins, the rest of even creation, where the rest of the animals were with him. The other great army is Dhul Qarnayn. So now look at this story, and in the context of an ecocentric world and the way in which a prophet engages with creation itself. Verse number 16. Bismillahir Rahman. Oh, sorry, verse number 16. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. وورث سليمان داود وقال يا أيها الناس علمنا منطق الطير وأوتينا من كل شيء. And Sulaiman was Dawood, David's heir. And he said, O mankind, we have been taught the language of the birds, and we have been given goodness from all things. Most surely this is a manifest grace from God Almighty. وحشر لسليمان جنوده من الجن والإنس والطير فهم يوزعون. And his army of the jinn, the spirits, and man, and the birds were gathered to him. So it doesn't just mean birds. It means all of these different creatures. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using brevity here. Allah is not going to list every single creature that was in the army of Sulaiman alayhi salam. They were all gathered to him. فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ. And they all formed into groups. You've all seen battalions. Sometimes there's a group of 100, another group of 100. They will march, they will march. They need to show that an army works together, that they each know which group knows where to go, how to go it, so that you're able to demonstrate the organization and the power of the army. So now, this army of Sulaiman alayhi salam is gathered, and in their pomp and in their glory and in all of that power, they begin to march forward group by group by group. Verse number 18. Very important. Everybody follow the ayah, inshallah. So they're marching. Hatta إِذَا أَتَوْا عَلَى وَادٍ نَمْلِ. Until when they came to the valley of the ant. قَالَتْ نَمْلَةٌ. An ant said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّمْلُ أُدْخُلُوا مَسَاكِنَكُمْ. O ants, enter into your houses, into your ant valleys. Why? لا يحتمنكم سليمان وجنوده وهم لا يشعرون. So that Sulaiman and his hosts may not crush you whilst they don't realize it. SubhanAllah. It's amazing, isn't it, the Quran, the way it provides us these principles. You see, Sulaiman alayhi salam knows the voice of this ant. Irrespective, the hosts, and you can imagine these wild beasts, you can imagine the elephants and the size of their feet and the trampling over everything in front of them. Every type of creature and army and man and jinn is now parading, storming through. Go back into your houses, lest they crush you without them realizing it. You see, there's one thing us knowing what we're doing. At times we've said throughout this series, we don't realize the damage that we are doing to the environment. The choices that we are making, the things that we consume, at the rate in which we are consuming them. And this is why there has to be a need for an environmental fiqh. Because otherwise we have no context behind how we need to regulate our buying, how we regulate our consumption, what should now be paused in consumption, and what needs to continue in consumption or revitalization. This will come in the coming nights because we're now talking about ijtihad and the way ijtihad works and the way in which our Maraja al-Karam will deal with some of these matters in the coming years, insha'Allah. Now, what's most important here is you can see that the claim of the ant is that these hosts, these armies, they don't realize what they're doing. Ants are so tiny. You and I, when we walk, we don't realize the steps that we are taking. Actually, it's very interesting. Subhanallah. The killer of Imam al-Hussein, alayhi salam, in his biography, it tells us that he used to wear, or he used to put nails small nails into the bottom of his sandals, maybe 6 nails. You know, sometimes you put them at all points, right? You put them around the top, 2 at the top, 2 in the middle, 2 in the bottom. Do you know why? He was worried that when he used to walk, that he would crush an animal, a bug underneath his feet. And so he had nails at the bottom of his sandals so that the nails would touch the ground and not the entirety of his soles would touch the ground. This is how God conscious he was. Imagine then when it comes to that moment to be able to stand in front of the master of the martyrs, Sayyid al-Shuhada, and what this evil man did, kick over the blessed body of Imam, grab him by the beard and hack away at his blessed neck. Salamullahi alayhi. Can you see sometimes the intellectual disparity or the problems between us, the cognitive dissonance that exists within us? Sometimes we're so aware, so conscious, but at the same time so unaware, so unconscious of the things that we are doing, the damages that we cause, how we work within one stream, we forget to work in the other, and what happens to us as an outcome of that. We don't realize the damage that we can cause off the back of those blind spots that we have within our own life. This ant said what? Enter into your dwellings, into your ant hills, so that the hosts of Sulaiman alayhi salam does not crush you whilst they know not. Verse number 19, Surah Naml. فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا مِنْ قَوْلِهَا وقال ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضاه وأدخلني برحمتك في عبادك الصالحين. So Sulaiman alayhi salam smiled, wondering at her speech, at this ant's words, and said, my Lord, grant me that I should be grateful for your favor, which you have bestowed upon me and upon my parents. What's very interesting here, you can actually see how the vision of the Quran, the vision of a prophet, the way in which he looks after his own army and the way in which he interacts with even the smallest of the creatures was to ensure their protection. When you see these verses and you begin to think about an ego versus homo versus ecocentric way of thinking, which one is this? Obviously an ecocentric worldview that allows us to imagine that the rights of every other creature has to be protected as well as my own rights. And that unless and until we look after the rights of the rest of the planet, the rest of the creatures, then we are either living in the ego or the homo-centric understanding of an environmental worldview. And this is something that we see from Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. There's a wonderful hadith accepted in both Shia and Sunni sources from the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The Prophet is narrated to have said, every prophet, one version says every prophet barring Idris alayhi salam, every prophet was a shepherd at some point in his life. How many prophets? 124,000. Every prophet was a shepherd at some point in their life. You know, immediately you and I will reflect, we'll say, why? What is so important about being a shepherd that every prophet and messenger from Adam to Rasulullah had to have this job, this service at some point in their life? The answer is twofold. One, that being a shepherd allows you to understand good leadership. Think about this. When you take your sheep out, the shepherd has to look after the entirety of the flock, not just one sheep. When he leads the sheep, he has to lead them in such a way that reaches good grazing grounds and come back in time that the sheep are not to be attacked in the night when mine and their vision is compromised. There are some creatures that attack well at night, don't they? The wolves, the lions, they particularly hunt at certain times. Similarly, the shepherd has to make sure that some sheep don't go so far ahead that they're out of view, and the straggling sheep are not out of earshot. So that when you say we're going this way or when you lead them, that they get lost. In the same way, a leader has to be able to have a holistic view of his flock, to understand what is good for all of them, to make sure the wolves don't snap at the flock, to make sure some don't go too far ahead and some aren't lost too far behind. Number one. Number two, the second reason was because every prophet of God had to have an understanding of a natural way of life. Until today, we have more or less had the experience of the outdoors. Now, this is a side point, but it's important to understand. I can only speak until my generation and see what is in front of my eyes. You may disagree, but I will tell you, generally speaking, the youth of this generation do not get to play outdoors as much. Everything is on laptop, everything is on iPad, everything is games in front of the screen. True or not? Whereas the previous generation, it was all about getting hurt, falling down, eating some mud, eating the dirt and growing your immune system. I'm not telling any kid here to go out and eat dirt, or any worms. Yeah? We said that there are some things that are haram to eat and some things that are makruh to eat. Okay? But generally, we had a very outdoor experience. We'd get on the BMX. Your dad would say, you're not allowed further than this. You would break the rule. Again, I'm not saying you're allowed to break the rules. This is the first time he's hearing that I would go beyond the boundaries that he would allow. You'd go to the BMX track, you'd fall over, you'd graze your knee, you'd come back, you'd get told off. But that was the way in which we grew up. But we had an outdoor living, an outdoor experience of the world. The more and more we are being pressed into a technological world, the more we are actually losing the outdoors. Story time. This is a true story. One of the ulama was saying this. In certain cities, there are high-rise buildings, like real high-rise, 100 stories, and it's difficult for you to see the stars, difficult for you, because there's so much light pollution, isn't there? There's so much covering you. One of the ulama was saying, do you know how much our kids are now losing the experience of the natural world? He says recently in New York, there were kids that were taken out of the main city for the first time. Like you go on a school trip or you get taken away for the day. They went out, and at some points in the lunar cycle, the moon is actually in the sky during the day, isn't it? Yeah. What color is it? It's white, isn't it? These kids, because they have been so used to an indoor lifestyle, never really looking up at the sky, never really reflecting on the system of creation, when they got out and for the first time in their life, they saw a moon in the sky during the day. Do you know what they did? They dialed 911 and said that the moon is falling in on us. This is true. They actually called 911. I'm not going to say anything about Americans, especially when you're married to one, but they say it's going to fall in on us. But it's not their fault, really. You give 70 excuses, right? It's not their fault. If your parents don't take you to see a museum, the natural world, if you're just sitting in front of the screen the whole day, if Homer Simpson is going to bring you up, if, sitcoms are going to bring you up, then what chance do you have in the outside world? The prophet said that every one of us was a shepherd at some point, in order to allow them to experience the natural world and the way to engage and protect and be part of the natural world. This hadith comes to us from Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari. He narrates that the Prophet took a group of his companions out of the city of Medina al-Munawwara and showed them certain berries that were very sweet, very delicious. The companions were shocked. Ya Rasulullah, you know about berries? You know what to pick and from where? Of course I do. Every prophet was a shepherd at some point in his life. Sometimes today, to know the natural world is something very difficult for people. We need to be able to return to this part of our lives. So then when we see Prophet Sulaiman and the Holy Prophet of Islam and the way in which the prophets were living and the way in which Ahlul Bayt alayhimussalam were living, it was very much about the natural world. One of the great important hadith comes to us from our fourth Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. After the massacre of Karbala, Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam is returned back to the city of Medina. The narration says Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam planted 1,000 trees. The narration also says that by every single one of them he did a 2 rak'ah salah. This is why he is known as As-Sajjad. As-Sajjad means what? The one who is frequent in prostration before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now most people, may Allah bless them, or the way in which this hadith is mentioned from the pulpits is maybe misunderstood. They only understand it within the realm of As-Sajjad being As-Sajjad. What they didn't realize maybe is that Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam was demonstrating the importance of regrowth. A society that has allowed the grandson of Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, to be massacred needs to go through rejuvenation. It needs to go back to the very basics of its understanding, of the way in which it lives. Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam planted 1,000 trees for the purpose of rejuvenating the earth, for the purpose of regrowing the earth. Who was it that attacked Medina and Mecca? Who was it that attacked Medina and Mecca after the event of Karbala? Yazid. Yazid was the one who destroyed Mecca and Medina. You can imagine how many trees were pulled up. You can imagine, even the narration says that blood ran like rivers in those cities because of how much attack there was on Medina and Mecca. This whole place needed to be revitalized. If Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam had not known how to engage the natural world, Imam alayhi salam could not have participated in rejuvenating the earth after its destruction. In the same way you and I are talking in the same way about rejuvenating the earth after the destruction that is taking place at the hands of people. Bima kasabat aydin nas la'allahum yarji'un, so that you may return back to God, so that you change your ways and return back to a planet that is supposed to be balanced and thriving. Now, for the rest of this discussion, inshallah, I want to be able to focus on maqasid al-bi'ah. Maqasid are those parts of the ijtihadi process that tells us the goals, the objectives of Islam. Meaning that when Islam wants to do something, when it wants to go somewhere, it can look at the high level expectations and say, this is what needs to be protected, and this is how it needs to be protected. I'll give you a simple example. This is the most elementary form of the maqasid al-sharia. Islam seeks to be able to protect a number of things. It needs to be able to protect the religion of God. Therefore, everything it does has to be towards that direction. If there is an act or a fatwa or an interpretation that breaks the religion of God, then it is not in line with the maqasid. And we know that that interpretation is wrong. The religion of God has to be protected. So that's why when we see those people who create disunity between Muslims, it breaks the religion apart, doesn't it? It divides us. It divides our strength. This is how we know for sure that it is wrong to break the religion, to create weakness within the Muslim community. One of the maqasid is the maqasid of the deen itself, ihtifadh al-deen, the protection of the deen itself. Or for example, the protection of the aql. Anything that stops the aql from working, the intellect from working, anything that stops you from having a working intellect is haram. Are you allowed to do drugs? No. Are you allowed to drink alcohol? No. Because your aql needs to be protected at every single moment. Or for example, the protection of your life. If your life needs to be protected and you have to make the decision between a medical intervention and not taking the medical intervention, it is a simple choice, isn't it? If the medical intervention saves my life, I have to take it. It is wajib for me to take it. Why? Because the Sharia is there to protect your life. It is there to protect your wealth. It is there to protect your honor. It is there to protect, to protect, to protect. What is the one thing that actually engulfs all of this for the protection of everything? Your religion, your wealth, your property, your life, the environment. If I don't destroy the environment, are you going to be able to live properly? No. If I destroy the environment, are you going to be able to look after your own property and wealth? No. And so one of the things that we need to bring into the ijtihadi process is what is known as the maqasid al-bi'ah, the ultimate objectives of how to be able to protect the environment. This feeds into the technique of ijtihad. So now when we look at an ayah or an hadith or an issue, and the mujtahid is trying to work out how does it play, how do we understand the application of this, we go back to the maqasid and say, does this protect the environment or does it destroy the environment? Does it continue the pollution or does it stop the pollution? And then we know that the actual hukm is either in line with the protection of the environment or not. If it's not in line, either it becomes haram or it becomes makruh. If it is in line, then we know it is in line with the maqasid of the bi'ah, the maqasid of the protection of the environment itself. Let me give you something that was mentioned in one of the studies that I was reading about this. This is a quote from a wonderful Muslim scholar by the name of Najma Muhammad and her environmental works. Sharia is more than just a set of inward spiritual exercises, externally manifest in specifications unrelated to earthly goals. Sharia is not just about salah and saum, it is an expression of Allah's will for a holistically just society. This is what the Sharia is. It is God's expression for a holistically just society. More than just ibadat, matters of service to God, the Sharia is objectively concerned with matters of interpersonal justice, mu'amalat. Indeed, mu'amalat make up the greatest number of legal provisions in the Sharia. Therefore, the way in which we interact for the sake of the protection of one another, you and I, as well as the protection of the planet and the species in that planet, also would make up some of the greatest number of laws when it comes to the Sharia itself. I want to be able to mention some examples of the idea of the common good within the Sharia. How the Sharia, how the ahadith speak about that everything there is for the common good. Either the common good of the Muslim community, the common good of the planet, or the common good of the entirety of humankind. This will give you an understanding of how the maqasid works, how we have headlines, objectives that need to be kept to. When hadith comes to us from our 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Hadi, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. إن المسلمين شركاء في الماء والنار والكلى. The Muslims are partners with each other when it comes to the matters of water, when it comes to fire, and when it comes to pasture. Muslims are shuraka in these matters. Now, just think about this hadith for a second. Is it just these three things? Or was the Imam just giving you what was normally being used and shared in terms of natural resources at that time? If the Imam was living today and he wanted to say the same hadith, do you imagine the Imam would only say those two things, or would he also explain that there are other things, resources that we should share amongst each other? You could imagine today, the Imam would say the Muslims are shuraka, they are partners in oil, in gas resource. Many Muslim countries have this, don't they? We are expected to share the resources between each other, correct? فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Vie with each other in good, not in oppression and wanton usage against one another. So at that time, the Imam just mentioned 3 points, but obviously it's speaking in principle of the different resources that were regularly being utilized at that time. Number one. Number two, think about this very carefully. Today, are the Muslim communities and nations actually shuraka of these things with each other? Yes or no? No. Yemen is going through a water-based crisis, wasn't it? There was a cholera outbreak there. And you know, of course, the illegal, illegitimate occupiers in Arabia, in Hijaz, are the ones that are destroying the whole water system within Yemen. Look at the difference between how the Imam speaks. That we are supposed to collectively preserve and share in these matters. When we break this and we start to hoard or we start to keep it away from one another, then this is when we start to break the objectives of the natural environment, of when it comes to ma or nar or kila. All of these things are supposed to be shared with each other. If there is a fatwa or a hukum or a government that breaks the sharing and the distribution of these things, then you will see that this is not a government in line with Islam. Only last month in Iraq, when there were so many power outages and there was such heat that it was stopping much of the various electricity from circulating, even Iran and the border be able to send electricity across the border to be able to help those who needed it. Look at this hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. لا يحل منع الملح والماء. It is not permitted to prevent the usage of salt or water. If someone or a company or a nation has access to this resource, it is not permitted for you to stop another person from being able to have access to it. Why? Because these things are in the objectives of what has to be protected from amongst all of us. One group doesn't get to use the resource for their benefit such that you don't get to have access to it. Why? Because it doesn't belong to a people. These are resources from God. The way the world is today, the United States of America will go in, occupy a country in order to steal the oil or the resources. It's not yours to steal. You know who said it? Remember, even before he got elected, it was famous. Donald Trump. I don't know why we allow Iraq to have its oil. If it was up to me, I would just come and take it. That's a quote. That was on CNN. And not one person from the person who was interviewing or the cameraman said, "What are you talking about, you child? What are you saying?" Look at the difference between Islam's logic and this individual's thinking. These things have to be protected. They are for all of us. We don't get to destroy it. We don't get to misuse it. We don't get to hoard it. It is available for humanity. It is available for the wider community to share. And the moment there is a practice that breaks it, this is not in line with the maqasid of the bi'ah, of the environment. And you and I know that the way in which we are living, or even the hukm, is not in line with Islam itself. So, what I'm going to do, inshallah, is to show you how the Quran speaks about those things that need to be protected. And that this then informs the ijtihadi process that our maraja al-kiram use to be able to do the istinbat of the Quran, of the ahadith. Open your Qurans, inshallah. There's many, many verses, so sometimes I'm just going to rush through them, or I'll tell you one, and then I'll mention the other verses. You can just note them down in your phones and look at them in your own time. Maybe I'll just set that as the homework for tonight, right? So, it's not too burdensome for everyone, inshallah, okay? So, the first thing is that there are ayat which tell us that there are certain things that keep the earth stable. This is a maqsad. This is a goal of protection. That when you break those things which are stabilizers in the earth itself begins to shake, begins to rumble, and those who are above the earth obviously get shaken with it. When you live in your house, if someone knocks at the underneath the house or the pillars of the house, what happens? It collapses. There are certain things the Quran has said are stabilizers of the planet that you don't get to destroy. First verse, chapter number 15, verse 19. Everybody's there, inshallah? Yes? I'm just going to read them quickly, even in English, so that we get through these ayat. As for the earth, we have spread it wide and set firm mountains on it and caused everything to grow in a well-balanced way. The mountains are like pegs. Anyone here gone like tenting, or anyone here like put up a tent? Yes? Remember we said that some of us never get to go outdoors? Yeah? When we go outdoors and you put up a tent, you have to put in pegs to be able to keep the tent in place, correct? What happens if you don't put in pegs or you pull up the pegs? What happens? Yeah. The mountains in the Quran are described like pegs. They go into the crust of the earth, under the surface, and keep the earth's surface stable. Next verse, chapter 21, verse 31. Everybody's there? Everybody's there? And we placed within the earth firm of set mountains, lest it should shake with them. We placed mountains into the earth. If they aren't there, the earth would shake. One more verse, just to give you context. Chapter 16, verse 15. Chapter 16, verse 15. And He, Allah, God, has placed firm mountains on the earth, lest it sway with you. And there are many other verses if you want to be able to research. 31:10, 78, 6-7, 79:32. Many, many verses in the Quran tell us that the mountains are pegs that keep it stable. If you destroy these mountains, you actually destroy the stability of the earth itself. Now, 10 points. Who can tell me what anti-environmental practice is being done that digs into the mountains and into the earth's crust in such a way that it's blasting it with water and destroying it from within? Say it louder. Fracking. We all know fracking. Have you heard of fracking? Yeah? In the States, it's being done. Here it's being done. Google this for yourself. UK fracking earthquake. Google it. Google it. UK fracking earthquake. You will find article after article telling you that where in the UK previously there were no earthquakes, now that we have started fracking and shooting such powerful water into the earth's surface, underneath, and destroying those things which are the pegs keeping the surface of the earth together, now in the UK we are beginning to have earthquakes where we've never had earthquakes before. Has someone found it? Just read out the headline. Read out any headline. Largest fracking tremor leaves the UK, leaves the biggest UK yet. Believed to be the biggest yet in the UK. Second biggest earthquake in the UK. Second earthquake stops the work at a UK fracking. UK's only fracking site. This is everywhere. This is everywhere. This is happening in the States. It's happening here. Think about this. The Quran says that we have made certain parts of the surface firm because when you break it apart, the earth shakes from what is above it. Now tell me, if you are marja, you are doing the ijtihadi process and you come to the ayah of Quran and then you come to the issue of fracking, the maqsad says, protect these mountains, protect the surface of the earth from shaking. And then you have someone come to you and says, Sayyidina, Marja, Ustadana, are we allowed to do fracking? What do you imagine the Marja is going to come out with? There's the door. Can you understand? Can you see how the Quran gives us guidance and then we are able to do istinbat from the Quran? Is oil that important that you need to destroy the surface of the earth for it? Or can you shift to other forms to give us power? Next set of verses, open the Quran inshallah. The Quran has maqasid, verses to tell us about the objective things that need to be protected for the common good of everyone. The verse speaks not about singular stabilizers. Mountains are being described as singular stabilizers. The Quran refers to multiple stabilizers as being alongside one another. Meaning what? That when you pollute one, it goes into the other. When you destroy one, it affects the other. I'll give you some verses, or maybe just one for the sake of brevity. Chapter number 13, verse number 3. Surah Al-Ra'd, verse number 3. Everybody's there? Anyone not there? Everybody there? And it is he who has spread the earth wide and placed on it firm mountains and running waters and created thereon two types of plant, every type of plant. And it is he who causes the night to cover the day. Verily in these are messages for people who actually think. Having placed the mountains firmly as part of the natural cycles of the earth that provide habitat for everyone, running waters provide balance to the ecosystem and the nutrients also to the following mention of the plants. Beyond this, there is a system of night and day that run parallel, yet simultaneously, depending on the way of the protection of the earth. Allah now mentions mountains alongside running water. Tell me, where do the rivers start? Who's done basic geography, GCSE geography? Mountains. When you have the mountains, the rivers start from the top and then they flow and then go into the seas. If you destroy the mountains, you also destroy the start of the rivers with it. And the rivers carry through that clean water for you. Understand that there is a cause and an effect. When you destroy one part of the ecosystem, it impacts the other parts of the ecosystem. Third, the Quran refers to natural cleaning cycles. Chapter number 13, verse number 7. Same chapter, Ar-Ra'd, verse number 17. The Quran talks about natural cleaning cycles. When you break the cleaning cycle of the earth, then the rest of the earth is also going to be damaged. This isn't rocket science, it's environmental science. That was supposed to be funny. Tough crowd, huh? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Whenever he sends down water from the sky, once dry riverbeds are now running high according to the perfect measurement of God. The stream carries out the dirt, subhanallah. The stream carries the dirt on its surface, and likewise from that, the metals and the other dirts which have smelt in the fire in order to make ornaments or utensils. There rises the dirt. In this way does God set forth the parable of truth and falsehood. For as far as the dirt is concerned, you will see it pass away, as does all the other dross. But that which is of benefit to man remains and abides in the earth. Does Allah not set forth parables for you? As part of the runoff stage, water flows back into the ocean and therefore fulfills the final responsibility of the stages of the water cycle. Water may not end up returning to the ocean due to human-induced mechanisms such as urbanization or stream channelization. As humans continue to consume and influence the stream flow of water, the dirt that is meant to be cycled out naturally remains within the earth. I'm sure you've all heard about the degradation of topsoil. Have you heard about this? You know, we're trying to plant on earth. We're trying to be able to rejuvenate the earth, grow food on the earth. Do you know how much soil degradation is occurring, that we are in the process of destroying the top flow of the surface of this earth that stops us from being allowed to plant our food in the ground? Someone do it for me. Just type it into Google and then shout it out. How much soil degradation due to the chemicals that we are washing out and destroying of that natural cycle is occurring? How much soil degradation is occurring around the world, or in the UK, or wherever you want to look? How much? Can you read the title of the article for us? Where is the article from? Soil degradation, the problem of? And how to fix the problem. Just tell me, what's the level of soil degradation in the earth? That we've actually destroyed the top soil, that we cannot plant food. You know that thing that you need to live? A third of the planet, according to one study here. Say that again. Food to grow needs 95% of topsoil available to it to be able to grow. And it looks like, according to this study, where are you reading it from? According to the US, the topsoil, according to that study, topsoil in the United States of America will be destroyed within 60 years. No wonder it needs to conquer Afghanistan in order to keep things growing for it. Sometimes I speak in jest and sometimes I speak in truth. Huh? Yeah, it's up to you to decide which one. Last one. The Quran refers to phenomena which revive the planet. Can you destroy those things that actually help revive the planet? No. Why? Because otherwise the planet cannot rejuvenate itself. Chapter number 22, verse number 63. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Do you not see that Allah has sent down rain from the sky and the earth becomes green again? Indeed, Allah is subtle, acquainted with everything. Chapter number 35, verse number 9. It is Allah who sends the winds, which lift up the clouds, which we then drive to a dead land, thereby bring the earth to life after its death. Such is also the resurrection in the hereafter. Chapter 35, verse 9. Just think about this for a second. You know, Google this word, or these two words. Read it in your own time. Cloud seeding. Don't look it up too much now. I just want to explain it to you. Do you know that we now have chemicals that we can put into the clouds that either can precipitate rain or stop rain from coming? Did you know that? You know, when we needed the Salat al-Istighatha, the Salat al-Istisqa to bring rain, right? Do you know about this, right? Dua, there's a salah that when rain is not coming, when there's a drought, there's the salah to be able to bring rain, right? Subhanallah. Our science has allowed us to understand the chemical processes in this called cloud seeding. You can put certain types of chemicals into the cloud that either bring rain quicker or can stop rain from occurring. Think about this very carefully. If you had this power to be able to stop rain from occurring, can you imagine what that power can be in the hands of a tyrant? It's happened. You know the illegal, illegitimate apartheid state of Israel? Do you know they've cloud seeded and stopped rain going to Palestine, rain going to Lebanon, rain going to Syria? Research it yourself, it'll be there. There are things that are supposed to rejuvenate the planet. What is it? Allah raises the winds. He sends the rain in order to bring about life again. Such is the same as the resurrection in the next world. If you have people or governments or tyrannies that are actually going to stop the rejuvenation of the planet through water reaching you, not only will the earth dry out and die, but you yourselves will not have water available to you to drink, to replenish the reservoirs that need to be available to you. Someone may come and say, Sayyid al-Marja, what is your opinion on cloud seeding? Is it permissible? What happens if it's used for warfare? Are we allowed to be able to stop people from having water? Are we allowed to stop people from having water? Imam Ali alayhi salam in this hadith, he said what? Not permitted to do mana', to prevent people from ma' wal milh, water and salt. Khalas. Uthman bin Affan, when he was circled by the Muslim Ummah that wanted his blood, they stopped from him access to water. Who came? Imam Ali alayhi salam sent Imams Hassan and Hussein salamullahi alayhim ajma'een. Break the lines. Deliver water to the house of Uthman bin Affan. So someone comes to the marja and says, are we allowed to use a type of warfare that stops water from reaching even our enemies? What will the marja say? Based on this ayah, based on this hadith, based on the example of Uthman bin Affan's case. Can you see how the ijtihad is done? It's beautiful, isn't it? Real world scenarios, real world issues. The istinbat is available to you and I. But of course, there was one individual who stopped the water from coming to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Hussein was the one who broke the lines to ensure water reached Uthman bin Affan. Years later, Hur ibn Yazid al-Riyahi would be the one to grab hold of the horse of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and try to send them away from camping at the banks of the river Euphrates. O Hur, may your mother weep for you for what you have done. Hur can only respond by saying, I know who your mother is, so I would never be able to say those same words back to you. It was on that night and on that day of Ashura that the children are crying, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. Their cries could be heard all the way to the banks of the river Euphrates, to the point where the river Euphrates has even the dogs and the pigs drinking from it. But the grandchildren of Rasulullah were denied from that water. This is why the companions, their hearts were breaking, why they were so ready to go out and try to reach the banks of the river Euphrates for bringing water for Imam al-Hussein, bringing water for the children of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Hur is standing in his tent. He is shaking a violent shake. They say to him, O Hur, you are the bravest of warriors from amongst us. We've never seen you like this. Are you afraid of the battlefield and the clashes of the swords? Are you afraid of death? He says, I am standing between the gates of heaven and hell itself. I don't want to make the wrong choice. Our poets tell us that Hur says, bind my hands, cover my eyes, take me to Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. He throws himself at the feet of Imam al-Hussein. I am so sorry for what I have done to you and your children. It tears the heart of Hur that Sakina is crying out, Al-Atash. It breaks the heart of Hur that Abdullah al-Radhi is crying. His eyes have fallen into his back of his head. This is how much the thirst is killing him. Halli min tawbah, has my repentance been accepted? Is there any way you can forgive me, Abu Abdullah? Tallahi, you have been forgiven, O Hur. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, help us to understand the Quran better. Help us to be able to understand the protection of our environment and our duties to the rest of creation. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين.